Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to talk to you about false water cobras. As most of you know that follow our channel regularly, you know I love my false water cobras. We've been keeping these guys for nearly 10 years now, and we've bred them the latter 3 or 4 years now of that decade. To talk to you and do a short video about a big falsie like this, I can tell you now, is going to be a real handful. False water cobras are different to anything you're likely to have kept. Certainly if you keep more common as snake species. They never stop moving. These are super agile, super interesting, super active snakes. They've got more personality than probably anything you're likely to keep other than the indigo snakes. These are a really different snake to keep. We find that really easygoing. They're not bitey, they're not aggressive. They've got one heck of a food response. But from a handling point of view, these make great pets and great snakes to keep for sure. I can't possibly concentrate for 15 minutes to tell you how to keep these and how to breed them. So what we're going to do in a second, we're going to put her back in her enclosure, and we're going to narrate over the top of film snippets and photos we've already taken of from an egg. We're going to go a different way to most people's videos. We're going to go from egg, caring for the hatchling, growing them on, housing them, food, good ideas for substrate, and of course breeding your false water cobras when they get to maybe 4 years old and onwards. These are really magnificent snakes to keep. This girl's over 7 foot long. She's our breeding female. And a few things to note. She's got a lot of weight on her. These are heavy bodied snakes. They need regular feeding to fuel their really high metabolism. They're nothing like a boa or a python that eats a big meal and does nothing for weeks. These things need to eat regularly. They can't eat big meals for the size of them, and they burn those calories off fast. She at the moment is really stocky. You could say she's a little too fat. This snake, like any big snake, when it lays a large clutch of eggs, loses a lot of body mass, and from then on we feed them up really well, because in the winter time she's going to have a 3-month period. We won't bremate her, but she'll naturally have a 3-month period where she chills out, slows herself down, and hardly eats at all. So we want a little bit of puppy fat on her while she's not eating during those winter months before her springtime breeding. But look at this beautiful creature, absolutely placid, and for her incredibly still. Come and have a close look. What beautiful animals they are. Now in the hobby, these are false water cobras, Hydrodynastes gigas, their scientific name, and you'll get other names bandied about, the commonest one being the Brazilian smooth snake, because they have such huge armour-like but incredibly smooth unkeeled scales. This video is going to be about captive keeping, caring and breeding false water cobras. It's not going to be about the natural history of the wild false water cobra. You can find that on the internet easily, and you can find on, if you search on YouTube, you can find other people's in-depth detail of their natural history in the wild. In fact, there's a reptile shop called Snakes and Adders. They do a YouTube channel, and if you check out a couple of their false water cobra videos, you'll find that not only do they keep them and breed them somewhat differently to us, but there's a good lot of information in one of their videos all about these guys in the wild, their subspecies, their geographic range, the environmental factors, temperatures and such like in the wild. But we're going to keep this video all about the basic, simple care, husbandry and breeding, because if you already keep these and breed them, you don't need me to tell you how. But if you're thinking of starting out with a false water cobra, maybe you're a little bit worried about what they're like or their captive care, then this video is for you. Check it out. Large female false water cobras if well fed and a good size, they'll typically lay around 20 eggs. And the eggs are large, about the size of a chicken's egg or a hen's egg if you like. Now those eggs don't want to be incubated too hot. False water cobras don't like the heat even when they're an egg. So about 28.5 degrees centigrade. They'll take around 70 days to hatch, but that varies. It can take longer. Don't panic about that. Eggs at the top of the incubator will hatch before eggs stacked at the bottom of the incubator. It'll make a difference. Those snakes that take longer to hatch, those hatchlings will be bigger and chunkier. They're incredibly good at slashing their way through the eggshell. Don't worry about that, but do worry about the fact they're very shy when they're hatching, and if they're disturbed, they'll remain in the egg and drown. Best to leave them alone until they're all out, if possible. Commercial or even homemade incubators work just fine, we have found. So those eggs are in the incubator. An incubator is an old fridge. Look, old. Obviously spotlessly clean inside. A really good thermostat. I like these ink birds. Set at 28.5 degrees, and it'll plus or minus 1 degree before it switches on. And the probes inside. Not touching anything, there's the probe. And we've got in here heat maps to the back and two sides. The two side ones are disconnected. We're only using the larger heat map at the back. The reason being, when all three come on at once and the thermostat switches off because they've reached the right temperature, the heat still emitted from those three boosts it up 2 more degrees or more. Too hot, it peaks and troughs. So one heat map is fine. And there's our lovely eggs. What else we got? We've got milk snake eggs there. And we've even got a gecko egg in there. Plenty of room for more, but for now, let's leave them cooking. So as just mentioned, it really is important to bear with them when they're hatching out. If you open the containers to take out youngsters, the others will stay in those eggs and they will drown. They're very, very shy to come out. Once out, we tend to put them all together in a rearing container, a little viv, a large tub, and we just let them chill out, and they're going to go straight into their first shed cycle, which it takes them a few days before they shed their skin, and either just before or just after, that's when we'll start to separate the babies out into their individual enclosures, because false water cobras can be cannibalistic, and that's not something we really want to happen. But for those first few days, they generally don't eat. They're just going through the shed cycle. Once they've shed their skin for the first time, usually about 5, 6, 7 days old, or just before, we'll separate them out into individual containers, enclosures, shoebox size plastic enclosures, plenty of ventilation, well-fitting lids. Normally, previous years, we've lined those shoe boxes with kitchen towel, small water bowl and a small plastic hide. This year we've gone for coir fibre substrate and a little bit of damp-proof membrane as the hide, and it's worked very well indeed so far. No differences there. Feeding wise, just get them feeding. Your baby false water cobras, offer them food once they've shed their skin for the first time. It doesn't matter what they eat, just get them feeding. Trout slices with a skin on, day-old cockerel, day-old chick legs with a scaly leg and feet cut off. You can try them on tiny silverfish, you can try them on pinky mice, and a lot of them will readily take very small rat pups from the get-go. Don't be put off if they don't eat straight away. They can be finicky things until you get them onto something they like. And everyone's different. Some will hit rat pups straight away, some will only eat pinky mice straight away. Some will only eat trout straight away. Just keep offering them every 3 or 4 days something different. If all else fails, a decent sized pinky mouse soaked in the juice from a tin of tuna that's in mineral water, that fishy water, soak those pinkies in there. That'll give them a bit of flavour, a bit of scent that the false water cobra will usually like. Do not worry if they don't eat. As long as they keep their body weight, don't worry if they don't eat for a few weeks. If all else fails, a pinky mouse gently inserted into their mouth. We're not force feeding, we're just assist feeding. Push it into their mouth, hold very still. Hopefully they won't spit it out and they'll start to swallow that. Maybe you'll have to do that 2 or 3 more times and that snake will get eating. Don't worry, because once they start eating and their appetite kicks in, these will be the biggest, hungriest feeding snakes you'll ever meet. They have a legendary food response, and once they get going properly, feeding them will be the least of your worries. The important thing is this: feed them every 4 days or so. They're not a python, they're not a boa, they're a highly active snake that needs lots of meals, and they can't eat a big meal. Don't feed those hatchlings anything thicker than their body. They just won't be able to eat it. Their jaws don't open wide like some snakes. And as they grow, you might find 1 wrap-up's not enough, maybe 2 or even 3 in a feed, about every 4 or 5 days. When it comes to handling your hatchling false water cobra, I'd say don't. Don't handle it unnecessarily until that thing's eating well. You're just disturbing it and you might put it off its food. So basically, yes, you're going to have to handle it when you clean it out, you change the water because it'll come out of its enclosure. But don't overly worry about handling it until that thing's eating. They'll grow quick. Within a year, you'll have a nice sized snake, and within 3 or 4 years, you'll have a very big snake that's big enough and old enough to breed. People are often put off when these things spread their hoods and hood up in their viv. They can be a bit viv defensive in so much as they'll display, they might tail whip, they tail whip like a monitor lizard, and they spread their classic cobra-like hood as a form of threat to say, leave me alone. Ours, when they're babies, they've only ever bit me when we sex them at a week old, and out of a whole clutch, maybe 1 or 2 will nip my fingers, never had a reaction. Ours, as they get bigger, I've never had a viv defensive bite at all. I've never been bitten in any aggression whatsoever. The only time I've been bitten is being an idiot, rushing around, putting food into the viv with my hand when one of the cobras is really hungry, and it's always the female. And invariably she misses the food item that I'm passing in there, and twice she's clouted my hand, and once she's bitten very hard, and another time actually actively chewed onto the base of my thumb. And again, no reaction whatsoever to the venomous secretions. It's something to beware of. You will get bitten in a food response, but a well acclimatized and well fed false water cobra, we never have any hassle at all. You could use a paintbrush roller, a mini roller that you'd use to paint behind a radiator. They've got a long arm on them. You can use that as a very cheap snake hook to hook your viv defensive snake out. Personally, all of our false water cobras, we reach in and pick them out. Housing of these guys, we have to talk minimums. People don't like talking minimums. You've got to talk minimums, haven't you? Our hatchlings go into 2 foot by 1 foot vivariums, and our adults start off or move on into 4 foot by 2 foot vivariums. Height's not important, but it's up to you. They can climb, they will climb, but they're pretty much a ground snake. They don't need to climb about. 4 foot by 2 foot, extending up to a minimum of a 6 foot by 2 foot. We actually join the vivs together and cut holes in to make them longer. But of course, an active snake like this, the more intricate you want to make it, the bigger you want to make it, the snake's not going to complain. Heating and lighting is entirely up to you. The snakes do not care less. This is what is crucially important. False water cobras do not like high temperatures. The temperature at the cool end of your viv needs to be 22, 24 degrees C. They can have a hot spot at the far end. It can be up to 35 degrees centigrade as long as it's a hot spot. But generally, 22 to 28 degrees variant across their enclosure is what you're looking at. Ideally somewhere they can hide away in each end, of course, and a large water bowl. Now, we're not talking large they need to swim around in. We're talking just large enough that these guys can curl up in and fully submerge. Do not be fooled into thinking this is a swampland snake that needs a swampland habitat. They have a super high metabolism and they eat a lot of food, hence they produce regularly a lot of smelly poo. If you go for a swampland habitat or a large water bowl that these active snakes are going to spread the water around into the substrate, you are going to have a bacteria load in your wet, damp substrate that is going to end up causing scale rot for your snake. Talking about substrate, that makes a big difference to your life as a false water cobra keeper, for sure. For a long time I used beach chips. They're not particularly absorbent and they don't do anything to help sort of dampen down the smell of a false water cobra poo, that's for sure. Koya's okay, but it's usually quite damp because you have to pre-soak the blocks. We've been trying this new product here, which is a Koya based pre-formed pellet, which is absolutely the best thing ever. It is designed for keeping big smelly snakes. The absorbency is second to none. Everything stays in a small absorbed patch, and it absolutely really eradicates the odour. I'm just hoping this stuff goes into production. At the moment it's only in a trial, but choose your substrate wisely. You do not want anything that's going to get too damp and hold bacteria, and if possible you do want something that locks in the poo and the smell. You can use anything you like. Newspaper and even kitchen roll for babies is fine, but you will find as a falsy keeper your choice of substrate will make a huge difference to your life and the pleasure of keeping these big, highly active, high metabolism, smelly pooing snakes. Before we move on to breeding your false water cobras, let's just quickly nip back to the topic of lighting. If you use light as a heat source at the hot end of your enclosure, such as a spot lamp or a ceramic, you must use a heat lamp guard. I can't make this video and tell you to do what I do. There's a reason for what I do, but you must use a heat lamp guard for sure. Lighting for the sake of lighting. False water cobras do not need additional lighting in their enclosure. Room lighting is sufficient. I'll repeat that. They do not need any extra lighting. If you want to give them low amounts of ultraviolet or UV lighting, fine. And I can tell you for sure, because we use it with our female, it makes your snake look far more attractive under any fluorescent lighting for sure. Breeding your false water cobras. This is how we've done it for the last few years, and this is how it worked for us from the very first try. Towards the end of November, we allow the nighttime temperatures to cool down more in the vivarium, and we also shorten the daylight period that the snakes receive. By the time February comes around and the end of February, we start increasing the temperatures slightly, and we only drop them a few degrees at night, but we start increasing those temperatures back to where they were, and we increase the daylight photo period. During that cooling time, our falses tend to go off their food for about 3 months of winter. As we warm them up and increase daylight, they usually kick in and start feeding. And once they do start feeding again, we feed them well for a couple of weeks. Make sure that female's got plenty of body weight and she's not ravenously hungry, because they can be cannibalistic. At this point, we'll introduce the male into the female's enclosure and watch what happens. Don't be opening and banging doors. Don't be moving about in front of your snake's vivarium. It'll put them off, or it can put them off. So watch carefully. If they're in the mood, the male will be hounding the female. He'll be caressing her neck with his tongue. His chin will be resting on the back of her neck, and his body will mirror hers. If she's receptive, it'll get very exciting. There could be some thrashing about, and he'll feverishly try and line his tail up with hers and lock and mate with her. If it's a successful mating and you observe it, fantastic. But even though, another week, 2 weeks later, put them together again, and we'll do that maybe 3 times just to make sure you've had successful matings. If you don't see them mate ever, don't worry. If he was showing interest and you couldn't be in the room, or you backed off so you didn't disturb them, put them together 2 or 3, even 4 times, hope for the best. Usually they will have mated. If the matings have been successful, over the next few weeks you'll notice your female falsie getting fatter and fatter, and it'll be the last third of her body. It's not like a fat snake that's eaten lots of food. It'll be the end third of her body which will get fatter and fatter, and eventually you'll see noticeable scale stretch where you can see the skin between her scales as her tummy gets bigger and bigger. Soon, over a few weeks later, you'll see her go into her shed cycle, and once she sheds her skin, that's her pre-lay shed, around and about 14 days after that, she's going to be looking to lay those eggs. And before then, really, before this point, you want 1 or 2 good egg lay boxes in her vivarium with her. We've tried clear, full of damp sphagnum moss, and we've tried black plastic boxes, hole cut in the lid she can get into, and either slightly damp sphagnum moss or very slightly damp coir. She always prefers the secretive dark boxes. In fact, when we haven't put those in, she's laid her eggs in her vivarium but not in the clear box. So a nice dark lay box they really like, and it's amazing how small an area a big falsie can get into to feel cozy to lay its eggs. Once those eggs have been laid, if you can catch them when they're quite fresh, we always separate the eggs and put them into an egg hatching box separately.
if you've left it a bit long and they feel too stuck together and you're worried about separating them, as long as you can get them into an egg laying box in batches, you'll probably be okay. For a hatching medium, we use Hatch Right. It's a bit more expensive than vermiculite. We find it's just that little bit more easier to work with. Now, like any snake eggs in an incubator, falsies do like a reasonable amount of humidity, so if you use vermiculite you will have to add water, but you do not want those eggs touching the box sides or getting dripped on. If they get wet, they'll definitely mould and they'll probably fail. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, at 28.5 degrees thereabouts, those eggs are going to take around 70 days to hatch, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit longer. Don't worry about that. Just don't let them get wet and mould. In the egg box itself, you don't need any ventilation if you open the box occasionally, or just put a very small couple of air holes in there. Don't let them dry out and don't let the humidity dissipate from that egg laying box.
Thanks for watching. Hopefully that was of some interest and help to those of you starting out down the road of false water cobra keeping. Believe me, once you get one, you'll be hooked on these snakes for the rest of your life. They are fantastic. And thanks for Reptiles for Sale UK for sponsoring this video. Check it out.